The rain in Sector Prime did not fall. It drifted, suspended in the magnetic updrafts of the megacity, turning the air into a shimmering curtain of neon mist. The capital of Earth was a vertical labyrinth of plasteel and glass, a monument to survival that scraped the stratosphere. Tonight, however, the usual chaotic pulse of the city had been strangled into silence. Millions of citizens stood packed onto the observation decks and maglev platforms, their faces illuminated by the harsh blue glow of holographic news feeds. They were waiting. The silence was heavy, pressurized, the kind of quiet that precedes a detonation. Down on the landing plaza, a vast expanse of polished obsidian suspended 1,000 feet above the lower streets. The atmosphere was suffocating. Rows of Earth Alliance Marines stood rigid, their pulse rifles locked against their chests, their visors reflecting the nervous twitch of the dignitaries behind them. Cale Arden stood near the rear of the logistics cordon, checking the data feed on his wrist for the third time. He was a man of sharp angles and tired eyes, dressed in the charcoal fatigues of a tactical analyst rather than the dress blues of the officers preening near the podium. At 29, Kyle had the weary posture of someone who had lived through 3 lifetimes of war. He tapped his temple, running a diagnostic on the neural implant embedded at the base of his skull. The readout scrolled across his retina. Cortisol regulation, optimal, adrenal suppression, active. "Stop checking it," a voice buzzed in his earpiece. It was Jensen, his communications officer, stationed in the command truck. "You are making me nervous just looking at you." "I am not the one sweating, Jensen," Kyle replied, his voice level. He glanced at the sweating diplomatic aides scurrying around the red carpet. "Look at them. You would think we were serving them up as the main course." We might be," Jensen muttered. "Have you seen the intelligence reports on the Noctri? They do not eat food. Kyle, they consume bioenergy, blood, adrenaline, fear, bringing one of them here to the heart of the capital. It is insanity." "It is politics," Kale corrected, shutting off the holographic display. "The war bled us dry. The Noctri Dominion ran out of resources, and we ran out of soldiers. This truce is the only reason the orbital shipyards aren't burning right now." "Still," Jensen said, "a war bride? It sounds medieval." "It is symbolic," Kale said, though he shared the distaste. "A hostage exchange dressed up in wedding finery. We send a diplomat to their homeworld. They send a high-caste warrior here. We smile, we wave, and we pray no one pulls a trigger." Kale looked up at the sky. The heavy cloud cover was beginning to swirl, disturbing the unnatural stillness of the rain. "They are here," Kyle said. The clouds did not just part. They were shoved aside. A shape descended from the upper atmosphere. A silhouette so massive it blotted out the city lights for 10 blocks. The Noctri Dread Cruiser was a jagged spear of alien metal, dark as a void, humming with a frequency that made teeth ache and glass vibrate. As the cruiser hung in low orbit, a smaller vessel detached. It was a shuttle, sleek and predatory, shaped like an obsidian tear. As it lowered toward the plaza, the streetlights in Sector Prime flickered and died. The massive holographic billboards advertising synthetic soda and off-world vacations distorted and vanished. "The hell?" a Marine lieutenant shouted nearby, tapping his helmet. "Comms are down. I repeat, comms are down." "It is their drive signature," Kyle said, stepping forward while others stepped back. "Noctri anti-grav engines disrupt local ionosphere output. It is not an attack. It is just how they fly." The shuttle touched down on the plaza with barely a sound, the landing gear settling onto the obsidian with the grace of a stalking cat. The rear ramp hissed open, releasing a fog of supercooled vapor that rolled over the red carpet, obscuring the feet of the terrified human delegation. Kyle watched, his heart rate steady at 60 beats per minute. His implant filtered the sensory input, stripping away the instinctual biological terror that was currently causing the Minister of Defense to tremble. Kyle saw only the tactical reality, a bottleneck, a high-value target, and a security perimeter that was far too porous. Then, she stepped out. Lysaria Vex did not walk. She seemed to pour herself into the space. She was tall, towering over the tallest Marine, her physique a masterwork of lethal elegance. Her skin was the color of moonlight on snow, pale and luminescent, contrasting violently with the living armor she wore. The armor was not metal but a shifting, organic substance like solidified shadow, rippling across her shoulders and chest, forming jagged ridges and sleek plates that seemed to breathe. But it was her face that froze the breath in the lungs of the welcoming committee. It was a face of terrifying beauty, sharp cheekbones and lips the color of a fresh wound. Her eyes were solid scarlet, glowing with an internal bioluminescence. Scanning the crowd not with curiosity, but with the detached assessment of a predator entering a pen of sheep. A collective gasp rippled through the thousands of spectators. Even the Marines flinched, weapons wavering. "Easy," Kyle whispered to himself, his eyes narrowing. He watched the way she moved. Her center of gravity was perfect. Her hands were empty, but her fingers ended in retractable talons that looked capable of shearing through Kevlar. The Noctri delegation, 4 heavily armored guards, flanked her, but Lysaria walked ahead, alone. She stopped at the center of the platform. The silence was absolute. The human president, a graying man named Thorn, stepped forward, his microphone shaking in his hand. "Citizens of Earth," Thorn began, his voice amplified by the backup speakers. "We welcome the Lady Lysaria Vex of the Noctri Dominion. Let this moment mark the end of fear." The irony was palpable. The air reeked of fear. Lysaria tilted her head, her scarlet eyes locking onto the president. She opened her mouth to speak, revealing the glint of elongated, needle-sharp fangs. That was when the world exploded. It started with a high-pitched whine. Kale's tactical hearing picked it up a fraction of a second before the screaming started. High above, 3 security drones that had been circling the perimeter suddenly arrested their flight paths. Their identifying lights shifted from Alliance green to a hostile, flashing red. "Hack!" Kyle shouted, his voice cutting through the silence. "Incoming!" He was moving before the first plasma bolt was fired. The drones dived, their cannons screaming. Bolts of superheated plasma tore into the platform, incinerating the red carpet and blowing craters in the obsidian. The crowd erupted into pandemonium. Dignitaries scrambled over each other, screaming, abandoning all protocol. The Marines, caught off guard and blinded by the smoke, fired wildly into the air. Lysaria stood motionless in the center of the chaos. She looked up at the diving drones, her expression not one of fear, but of annoyance. A plasma bolt struck the ground near her, sending a shower of molten rock shrapnel into the air. One of her Noctri guards was vaporized instantly. Kale sprinted across the open ground. His neural implant had flatlined his fear response, leaving his mind perfectly, crystal clear. He calculated the trajectory of the second drone. It was banking for a strafing run directly at the war bride. She was the target. If she died, the truce died. If the truce died, the dread cruiser in orbit would turn the megacity into a crater. "Get down!" Kale roared. Lysaria turned toward the voice, her eyes widening slightly. She saw a human male sprinting toward her, unarmed, moving with a fluidity that shouldn't have been possible for his species. Kale didn't stop. He didn't hesitate. He launched himself at the terrifying alien warrior, his shoulder driving into her midsection. The impact was like hitting a marble statue. She barely moved, but the force was enough to knock her off balance. Kale hooked his leg around hers and twisted, using sheer momentum to drag them both down behind a flickering hollow barrier that had been set up for the press. They hit the deck hard, Kale landing on top of her, shielding her body with his own. A split second later, the drone's plasma fire raked the space where she had been standing, scorching the air and turning the decorative flags to ash. Silence followed the roar, broken only by the panic of the crowd and the sizzling of melted stone. Underneath him, Lysaria moved. It wasn't a struggle, it was an explosion of power. One moment Kale was shielding her, the next, the world spun violently. A hand gripped his throat, not choking, but holding him with the immovable force of a hydraulic press. He was slammed back against the base of the hollow barrier, pinned. Lysaria loomed over him, her body pressing against his, her face inches from his. Her lips were pulled back in a snarl, exposing the full length of her fangs. Her scarlet eyes burned with a feral intensity, the pupils narrowed to vertical slits. "You dare touch me, human," she hissed. Her voice was a low vibration that Kale felt in his chest bones. Any other man would have emptied his bladder. Any other man would have been screaming for mercy. Kale looked up at her. His pulse remained steady. His implant regulated the cortisol spike, allowing him to see the details. The faint geometric patterns on her iris, the smell of ozone and copper on her breath, the way the living armor on her shoulder was knitting itself back together where shrapnel had grazed it. He did not look at her fangs. He looked her directly in the eyes. "I am not your enemy," Kale said. His voice was calm, conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. "And you are welcome." Lysaria froze. She blinked, the feral haze clearing slightly. She stared at him, bewildered. She could hear his heart. It was beating with a slow, rhythmic thud. There was no scent of sour terror sweat. There was no dilation of the pupils indicating panic. "You," she started, her grip on his throat loosening slightly. "You are not afraid." "I am busy," Kale replied. He tapped his earpiece. "Command, Sector 4 is compromised. Reset drone IFF codes. Alpha pattern. Now." He looked back at Lysaria. "You can let go now, unless you plan to use me as a shield, which, tactically speaking, is a poor choice given my lack of armor." She released him, pulling back as if burned. She stood up, her movements fluid and sharp. The Noctri guards who had survived rushed forward, weapons raised, hissing at Kyle. Lysaria raised a hand, silencing them instantly. "Stand down," she commanded. Her voice was regal again, imperious. She looked down at Kale, who was brushing ash off his fatigues. He stood up, checking his sidearm. "Who are you?" she asked, the question sharp. "Kale Arden," he said. "Logistics." The security drones were neutralized as the override codes took effect, crashing them into the side of a nearby skyscraper. The assassination attempt was over. Cameras from the surviving news drone zoomed in. The image was beamed to billions of screens across the system. The terrified human elite cowering in the mud, the Noctri guards poised for violence, and in the center, the terrifying war bride standing shoulder to shoulder with a lone human analyst who looked bored. 2 hours later, the debriefing chamber in the Earth Alliance spire was a pressure cooker of shouting voices. "It was a breach of the highest order." General Holloway slammed his fist onto the table. "Terrorists! On the landing platform!" Across the table, Vok, the Noctri ambassador, sat with stillness that was more threatening than the shouting. "An assassination attempt," Vok corrected, his voice like grinding stones. "You invite the daughter of House Vex to your world as a symbol of peace, and you greet her with plasma fire. The Dominion will not accept this insult. President Thorne sat at the head of the table, looking 10 years older than he had that morning. Ambassador, please. We are investigating the source of the hack. It was an extremist faction. We will find them. Your security is incompetent, Vox sneered. Our Lady Lysaria cannot be entrusted to your trembling soldiers. Look at them. He gestured to the perimeter guards. They reek of fear. A frightened guardian is a useless one. Kyle stood in the corner, leaning against the wall, trying to be invisible. He wanted a coffee. He wanted to go home to his small apartment in Sector 7 and sleep for 12 hours. There was one. Lysaria's voice cut through the noise. She stood by the window, looking out at the rain-slicked city. She had removed her helmet, her long hair, white as bone, spilling down her back. She turned, her scarlet eyes sweeping the room until they landed on Cale. Him, she said. The room went silent. All heads turned to Cale. Mr. Arden? President Thorne blinked. He is an analyst, a logistician. He moved when your soldiers froze, Lysaria said, walking toward the table. He threw his body between the fire and myself. And when I held his life in my hand, he did not beg. He did not smell of fear. She stopped in front of Kyle. Up close, she was even more imposing. She smelled of exotic spices and cold air. Why? She asked him. Kyle pushed off the wall. Calculated risk, he said dryly. If you died, the fleet opens fire. I live in this city. I prefer it unvaporized. A ghost of a smile touched Lysaria's lips. It was a terrifying expression. President Thorne looked from Lysaria to Cale, and a spark of political desperation lit up his eyes. Ambassador Vox, Thorne said slowly. The bonding ceremony requires a human representative, a partner. Originally, we selected Senator Miller's son, but... The boy who wet himself behind the podium? Vox asked. Unacceptable. House Vex does not bond with cowards. Then we pivot, Thorne said, his voice gaining strength. We offer you Cale Arden, a veteran, a man who has already proven he will risk his life for the Lady Lysaria. Cale's eyes widened. Excuse me, Mr. President. With all due respect, I am not getting married to a space vampire for a photo op. It is not a marriage in the human sense. Cale, Thorne said quickly, his tone shifting to a commanding whisper. It is a bonding, a political partnership. You signed the enlistment papers. Son, you serve at the pleasure of the Alliance. I am not a prop, Cale shot back. And I, Lysaria interrupted, her voice sharp as glass, will not be chained to a fragile mortal prop. She looked at Cale with disdain. He is brave, perhaps, but he is a servant, a logistician. Cale met her gaze. And I don't have a desire to be a trophy groom on your arm. Lady Vex, I have actual work to do. Lysaria's eyes narrowed, but the flash of amusement returned, stronger this time. She stepped closer to him, invading his personal space, looming over him. Leave us, she commanded. Lady Lysaria? Vox hesitated. Leave us, she barked. The sound cracked like a whip. The ambassadors and the president hesitated, then slowly filed out of the room, leaving Cale and Lysaria alone in the soundproofed chamber. The silence stretched. Lysaria circled him, her movements predatory. She walked behind him, her breath ghosting over his neck. They are all afraid of me, she murmured. Her voice was softer now, stripped of the political theater. It was genuinely curious. The president, the soldiers, even the ones who hate me, they look at me and they see death, my own kind. They respect my lethality, but even they fear my temper. She stopped in front of him again, But your heart beats like a metronome. Why aren't you afraid? Kyle looked at her. He could lie. He could talk about duty or honor, but he was tired. I was on the jagged edge of the Theta colony during the second offensive, Kyle said quietly. I saw my entire squad wiped out by a Noctri hunter pack in less than 30 seconds. I spent 3 days hiding in a ventilation shaft with a broken leg and a dying comms unit. Lysaria watched him, her expression unreadable. I felt enough fear in those 3 days to last a lifetime, Kale continued. When I got back, I volunteered for the neural modulation program. They put a chip in my spine. It doesn't make me brave, Lady Vex. It just cuts the circuit. I can see the danger. I can understand the risk. But the panic, the shaking, that part of me is gone. He stepped closer to her, closing the distance she had created. I refuse to let fear dictate the rest of my life, he said. You are dangerous, I know that. But you are also standing in a room full of people who want you dead, and you haven't killed anyone yet. That makes you rational. I can work with rational. Lysaria stared at him for a long moment. The scarlet glow in her eyes softened, shifting to a deep crimson. You are broken, she said almost gently. Like a weapon that has been fired too many times. We are all broken, Kyle replied. That is what war does. Lysaria turned away, walking to the window. She looked at her reflection in the glass, then back at him. I will not be a pet, she said. If I agree to this bond, it is on my terms. I retain my combat autonomy. I answer to no human commander. And you? She pointed a clawed finger at him. You are not my master. You are my equal. If you try to command me, I will break your spine. Deal, Kyle said instantly. I don't want to command you, I just want to make sure we both survive the week. Then it is agreed, she said. The signing ceremony was held in the private sanctum an hour later. It was a bizarre fusion of bureaucracy and blood magic. The contract was digital, a holographic scroll detailing trade routes, ceasefire zones, and the terms of the bonding. But the Noctri seal required something more visceral. Lysaria extended her hand. A small blade extended from her gauntlet, and she sliced her palm. The blood that welled up was almost black, shimmering with iridescent specks. Your hand, she demanded. Kyle hesitated for a fraction of a second, then extended his hand. She sliced his palm with a quick, surgical motion. She pressed her hand against his. Kyle gasped. It wasn't just physical contact. The Noctri blood tech in her veins reacted to his biology. A jolt of cold electricity shot up his arm, racing straight to his spine. For a second, his vision went white. He felt a phantom presence in the back of his mind, a cold, sharp awareness that wasn't his own. I see you, a voice echoed in his head. It was her voice, but internal. The bond is sealed, Vok intoned gravely. 2 bloods, 1 path. Lysaria pulled her hand away. The wound on her palm was already healing. Kyle's hand was still bleeding. He wrapped a handkerchief around it, his hand shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from the shock to his nervous system. Welcome to the family, husband, Lysaria said. The word sounded strange in her mouth, laced with a dark, dry humor. Don't expect me to cook, Kale muttered, clutching his throbbing hand. As the doors to the sanctum opened and the flashes of cameras erupted once more, the scene shifted, far below the spire, deep in the subterranean levels of the city where the neon light didn't reach. A monitor flickered to life. 2 figures stood in the shadows. One was human, dressed in the expensive suit of a corporate executive. The other was Noctri, cloaked in heavy robes that obscured their face. On the screen, The image of Kale and Lysaria standing together was frozen. "The bond is active," the human said. "Thorne actually went through with it. He gave her the analyst." "It changes the variables," the Noctri figure hissed. "The analyst is resistant. The fear frequency does not affect him." "It doesn't matter," the human replied. "He is close to her now. That makes him vulnerable, and it makes her vulnerable." The human figure tapped the screen, their finger resting on Lysaria's throat. "Let them play house for a few days. Let the public believe this farce of peace takes root. When we trigger the catalyst, the betrayal will be all the sweeter. And the war bride? She is the key." The human smiled, a cold, predatory expression. "Her blood is the ignition. We don't need her to be willing, and we just need her to be here." The screen flickered off, plunging the room back into darkness. "Initiate Phase 2, the Noctri whispered. "The peace must die." The residence assigned to them was less of a home and more of a fortress suspended in the sky. Known as the Zenith Spire, it was a solitary needle of plasteel and glass that pierced the smog layer of the megacity, offering a view of the stars that most citizens had not seen in a generation. It had been retrofitted in a hurry to accommodate the unique physiological needs of a Noctri dignitary, resulting in an architectural hybrid that was as unsettling as it was impressive. Kale Arden stood in the center of the main living area, watching the walls. They were not static. Veins of bioluminescent Noctri circuitry pulsed beneath the semi-translucent panels, glowing with a soft, rhythmic violet light that mimicked a slow heartbeat. The air recycling system had been modified to carry the scent of ozone and chilled nitrogen, the preferred atmosphere of the Noctri homeworld, which meant Kale had to wear a thermal underlayer just to keep his teeth from chattering. Outside the panoramic windows, 3 heavy combat drones circled the tower in a relentless holding pattern, their sensor arrays sweeping the glass every 30 seconds. Inside, in the deeper shadows of the vaulted ceiling, Kyle knew there were Noctri sentries, silent, camouflaged guardians who clung to the rafters like bats, watching every move. "It is cozy," Kyle said to the empty room, his breath misting in the air. "If you like living inside a lung." He walked to the kitchen unit, a sleek island of chrome that looked entirely too fragile for the current occupant of the house. He craved coffee. His neural implant managed his cortisol, but it did nothing for the bone-deep exhaustion of moving his entire life into a political prison. He placed a capsule of synthetic espresso into the machine and pressed the brew button. The machine whirred, groaned, and then emitted a high-pitched shriek. Sparks erupted from the casing, followed by a puff of acrid black smoke. "Damn it," Kyle sighed, unplugging the smoking ruin. "Your technology is temperamental." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Kale turned to see Lysaria Vex standing in the archway that led to her private chambers. She wore a flowing robe of dark, liquid fabric that seemed to absorb the light around her, leaving her pale face and scarlet eyes suspended in the gloom. "It is not the machine," Kale said, tossing the ruined capsule into the recycler. "It is the ambient interference. Your biofield plays hell with unshielded electronics. That is the 3rd coffee maker I have lost in 2 days." Lysaria glided into the room, her movements making no sound on the polished floor. She inspected the dead machine with a look of mild disdain. Perhaps it sensed its own inferiority and chose self-destruction, she suggested. A noble end for a beverage dispenser. It was just making coffee. Lysaria. It was not making a philosophical statement. She looked at him, her head tilting slightly. "You require stimulants to function. I have observed this. Human physiology is remarkably inefficient. You spend 1/3 of your cycle unconscious. and the rest of it ingesting chemicals to remain alert. And you consume the bioenergy of living things, Kale countered, leaning against the counter. I think I will stick to the caffeine. Thanks. He expected her to bristle, but she only offered a small, sharp smile. The initial hostility of their first meeting had settled into a strange, jagged truce. They were two soldiers trapped in a cage, circling each other, testing the bars. I am bored, Kyle Arden, she announced suddenly. The High Council has forbidden me from leaving the tower without a security detail the size of a battalion. I have cleaned my armor. I have meditated. I have sharpened my blades. Now I am staring at walls that breathe. Welcome to civilian life, Kyle said. We have ways to pass the time. Entertainment. He gestured to the media wall, a massive holographic interface. Have you ever seen a movie? Pre-war cinema? Half an hour later, they were seated on the sprawling, uncomfortable couch. Kyle had selected a classic action film from the late 21st century, a loud, explosive spectacle about a lone soldier fighting an army of cyborgs. Lysaria sat with perfect posture, her eyes tracking the movement on the screen with intense focus. Kyle watched her more than the movie, fascinated by her reactions. She did not flinch at the explosions. She did not cheer for the hero. She analyzed, on screen, the hero engaged in a brutal hand-to-hand fight, flipping a cyborg over his shoulder and snapping its neck with a quick twist. Absurd, Lysaria stated flatly. It is an action movie, Kale explained. It is heightened reality. It is physics, she corrected. To generate that amount of torque from a standing position, his skeletal structure would need to be reinforced with titanium alloy. Judging by his movement speed, he is unaugmented flesh. If he attempted that maneuver, he would dislocate his own shoulder and the cyborg would simply stab him in the femoral artery. He left his lower guard completely open. He is the hero, Kyle said. He has plot armor. He has poor technique, she insisted. And why is he pausing to deliver a witty remark? The enemy is down, not dead. You confirm the kill. You do not talk to the corpse. It is called a one-liner. It is for the audience. Lysaria narrowed her eyes at the screen as the hero kissed the female lead amidst the burning wreckage of a base. Now they are mating? In a combat zone? While breathing toxic fumes? She looked at Kyle, genuinely baffled. Humans are suicidal, Kyle laughed, a genuine sound that surprised him. You are sucking all the fun out of this, you know that? I am providing a tactical assessment, she said, but the corner of her mouth twitched upward. If you want fun, husband, put on the training simulations. I will show you how that fight should have ended. The domestic quiet, however, was a luxury that did not last. 3 nights later, they were summoned to the grand hall of the Presidium for an official reception honoring the unity of the two species. The atmosphere in the hall was brittle. Chandeliers of crystal and photon glass hung above a crowd of Earth's elite, politicians, generals, and corporate magnates who were dressed in their finest silks and synthetics. But beneath the glamour, the scent of fear was pungent. When Kale and Lysaria entered, the conversation died instantly. Lysaria was a vision of terrifying grandeur. She wore a ceremonial gown of deep crimson that looked like it was woven from fresh blood, structured with rigid bone-white plating that accentuated her height and power. Kale wore a formal dress uniform, the stark black and silver of the Alliance Logistics Corps, standing by her side not as a subordinate, but as an anchor. They moved through the crowd like a shark moving through a school of nervous fish. The crowd parted, creating a wide berth. Ambassador, a trembling senator said, bowing too low as they approached. We are honored, truly. Lysaria looked down at the man. You are sweating. Senator, is the environmental control malfunctioning? No, no, Lady Vex, the man stammered, wiping his forehead with a silk handkerchief. It is just the excitement, the historic nature of the evening. Kale saw the predator in Lysaria's eyes wake up. She despised their fear. It insulted her. To the Noctri, fear was a weakness to be culled, or a spice to be savored. But this polite, trembling cowardice was merely irritating. Relax, Senator, Kale said, his voice cutting through the tension loud enough for the nearby groups to hear. She has already fed this week. You are quite safe. The silence that followed was absolute. The senator froze, his eyes bulging. A woman nearby gasped, dropping her champagne flute. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound like a gunshot. Lysaria turned her head slowly to look at Kale. For a second, he thought he might have pushed too far. Then, a slow, chillingly beautiful smile spread across her face. It was sharp, dangerous, and undeniably amused. Indeed, Lysaria purred, her voice carrying through the hall. My husband keeps me well satiated, though I admit the appetizers do look tempting. She glanced pointedly at the senator's exposed neck. The senator looked as if he might faint. Kale took Lysaria's arm, steering her gently toward the bar. Play nice, he whispered to her as they walked away, leaving a wake of stunned silence. You started it, she murmured back, her eyes dancing with dark mirth. I did not know you possessed such a wicked tongue. Kale, I approve. I just wanted them to stop staring at you like a monster, he said. If they are going to be scared, they might as well be scared for a funny reason. They fear me because I am a monster, she said, her smile fading slightly. Do not pretend otherwise. You are a weapon, Kyle corrected. There is a difference. A monster kills for pleasure. A weapon kills for a purpose. Tonight, your purpose is to drink bad synthetic wine and not decapitate the Minister of Trade. A difficult mission, she sighed, taking a glass from a terrified waiter. But for you, I will attempt it. The tension of the gala followed them back to the spire. The adrenaline of the public performance had not faded. Instead, it had mutated into something sharper, more intimate. They were in the main observation deck, the city lights spreading out below them like a grid of burning embers. Kale was loosening his collar, tired from the hours of vigilance. Lysaria was pacing, her energy restless. You enjoyed that, she said, circling him, provoking them, watching them squirm. I enjoyed watching you handle them, Kyle said, turning to face her. You have a lot of restraint, Lysaria. I know how much you wanted to snap that senator in half. He smelled like soured milk, she said, stepping closer. She was moving in a spiral, closing the distance with every step. But you smell different. She stopped directly in front of him. She was taller than him by a few inches, forcing him to look up slightly. The bioluminescence of the room reflected in her eyes, making them glow with a hypnotic intensity. I can hear it, she whispered. Your heart. She raised a hand, her clawed fingertips hovering millimeters from his chest. Thump, thump, thump. She mimicked the slow, steady rhythm. It is unnatural. Even the bravest warriors of my kin have a spike in their pulse when death stands this close. But you are a placid lake. The implant, Kyle said, though his voice felt tighter than usual. It dampens the response. Does it? She leaned in, her face next to his neck. He could feel the cold radiance of her skin, the terrifying power coiled in her frame. Or are you simply empty? Have you seen so much death that you no longer care if you die? I care, Kyle said. He didn't move away. Then why doesn't it race? She challenged, her lips grazing his ear. I could tear your throat out before your neurons even registered the pain. I am the apex predator. Kale. Your biology should be screaming at you to run. I am not running, he said. Why? Because I am not afraid of you, Kale said. And then, without thinking, he stepped closer. It was a matter of inches, but the shift was seismic. He closed the gap, his chest brushing against her armored bodice. He looked directly into her scarlet eyes, his expression intense, searching. For the first time, Lysaria flinched. It wasn't a flinch of fear. It was a recoil of surprise, of sudden, sharp confusion. She had been pushing him, testing his boundaries, expecting him to break or retreat. Instead, he had stepped into the fire. The air between them crackled. It wasn't just political tension anymore. It was raw, biological attraction, the dangerous pull between two lethal things that recognized each other. Kale felt a spike of heat that had nothing to do with fear. He saw her pupils dilate, her breath catch. My heart is not racing because I am scared. Lysaria, he said quietly. If it starts racing, it will be for a very different reason. Lysaria stared at him, her lips parted slightly. The predator had been caught off guard by the prey. She pulled back abruptly, spinning away from him with a swirl of her robes. She walked to the window, putting distance between them, her posture rigid. You are a dangerous man, Kyle Arden, she said, her voice tight. Go to sleep, before I forget that we are allies. Good night, Lysaria, Kale said, his voice steady, though his hands were trembling slightly as he turned away. Not from fear, but from the realization of how close he had just come to the edge. Sleep did not come easily. 2 hours later, Kyle was awake, staring at the ceiling. A notification on his datapad had blinked red, a silent alert from the tower's internal diagnostic system. He got up, pulling on his tactical vest over his undershirt, and grabbed his sidearm. He found Lysaria already in the hallway. She had shed her ceremonial gown for a sleek, form-fitting bodysuit that merged with her living armor. She held a curved Noctree blade in her hand. You heard it too, Kale whispered. I felt it, she corrected. A disturbance in the air pressure. Someone opened a maintenance hatch on level 40. That is inside our perimeter, Kale said, checking his scanner. The logs say the hatch is sealed. The logs are lying, she said. They moved together, a silent unit. They descended the service stairs to the 40th floor, a level dedicated to environmental systems and server nodes. The hum of the machinery was loud here, vibrating through the floor gratings. Kyle scanned the access panel of the main server node. Clear, he signaled. Lysaria moved past him, her head cocked. She sniffed the air. No, not clear. Ozone and burning copper. She lashed out with her blade, slicing through a bundle of cables in the corner. Behind the cables, embedded in the wall, was a small pulsing device. It looked like a black beetle, its shell etched with glowing runes. Kale knelt to inspect it. Do not touch it, he warned. He pulled a frequency jammer from his belt and activated it before prying the device loose with a pair of non-conductive pliers. He held it up to the light. This isn't standard espionage tech. The base is human military grade, but the signal transmitter, that is Noctree biotech. A hybrid, Lysaria hissed, her eyes narrowing. Someone is listening. Someone who has access to both our armories. This confirms it, Kale said, his face grim. We are being watched, and not just by my government or yours. There is a third player. The confrontation the next morning was explosive. They stood in the command center of the tower. General Holloway represented the human security detail, while Sub-Commander Var stood for the Noctri guards. "This is preposterous," Holloway shouted, pointing at the device Kale had placed on the table. "You are accusing my men of planting bugs? This is clearly alien tech. The Noctri are spying on their own bride." "Your ignorance is offensive," Var snarled, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. "This device uses human encryption protocols. It is a clumsy attempt by your intelligence agencies to monitor Lady Lysaria, poorly disguised as our technology." "Watch your tone, alien," Holloway warned. "Enough!" Lysaria shouted. She slammed her hand down on the table, denting the steel surface. The room went deadly quiet. She looked ready to tear throats out. Her armor was rippling, spikes extending from her shoulders. "You are both incompetent. While you bicker like children, an enemy walked into my home and violated my privacy." "We are conducting a full sweep," Holloway said defensively. "Your sweeps are useless." Lysaria stepped forward, but Kale moved in front of her. He didn't push her back. He simply stood between her and the general, acting as a physical barrier. "General, Commander," Kale said, his voice calm but hard as iron. "The device is a hybrid. That means the breach came from a point of cooperation. It means we have a leak in the joint task force. You are an analyst. Arden," Holloway spat. "Stay in your lane." "I am the bonded partner of the Lady Lysaria," Kale said, his voice dropping an octave. "And under the terms of the treaty, that makes me the co-commander of this residence. If you cannot secure this tower, we will do it ourselves. Get your men out of the inner perimeter. Revet every single officer. If I see a guard who hasn't been cleared by both me and the Lady Vex, I will have them court-martialed. And she," he gestured to Lysaria, "will eat them." Holloway turned purple. Var looked at Kale with a flicker of begrudging respect. "Do it," Kale ordered. As the officers stormed out, arguing, Kale slumped into a chair. He rubbed his temples. "You stopped me from killing him," Lysaria said. She was still vibrating with rage. "Killing the general would have been politically inconvenient," Kale said. "Satisfying, maybe, but inconvenient." Lysaria looked at him. "You took command. You defended our territory. It is our house," Kale said. "I don't like people breaking into my house." Later that evening, the adrenaline had faded, leaving a heavy, sullen quiet. They sat in the kitchen, the only room that felt remotely human. Kale was drinking tea. Lysaria was nursing a vial of synthetic nutrient fluid, a poor substitute for the real thing. "I am tired, Kale," she admitted softly. It was the first time she had shown weakness. "I was bred for war. I understand the battlefield. I know who the enemy is because they are the ones shooting at me. But this shadows and whispers. I do not know how to fight this." "I know," Kyle said. "I am tired too. They put me here because they thought I was a safe pair of hands, a tool. Use the man with the broken fear response. He won't ask questions. They just want us to smile for the cameras until they decide it is time to start shooting again." Lysaria looked at the hybrid bug sitting on the table between them. "We are pawns," she said bitterly. "Maybe," Kale said. He reached out and crushed the bug under his thumb. "But pawns can become queens if they make it across the board. If we are going to be players in this game, we need to stop playing by their rules. What are you proposing?" "We stop trusting the official channels," Kale said. "We find out who built this device. We find out who wants this war to restart, and we stop them. Together?" Lysaria studied him. "A traitorous pact?" A survival strategy, Kale corrected. She extended her hand across the table. Kale took it. Her skin was cool, her grip strong enough to crush bone. But she held him gently. Together, she agreed. The citywide blackout hit 3 nights later. It wasn't a storm, it was a cascading failure of the primary fusion grid, triggered by a feedback loop from the Noctri terraforming engines in the upper atmosphere. The lights in the megacity died instantly. The Zenith Spire plunged into darkness. The backup generators kicked in, but they were flickering, weak. The environmental controls failed. For Kale, it was an inconvenience. For Lysaria, it was a catastrophe. The sudden drop in the tower's energy field disrupted the suppression dampeners in her armor. Her biology, tuned to the high-energy resonance of her homeworld, went into immediate, violent withdrawal. Kale found her in the main atrium. She was backed into a corner, huddled against the glass, her body shaking violently. "Lysaria," he called out, raising a flashlight. "Stay back," she shrieked. Her voice was distorted, guttural. He shined the light on her and froze. She had changed. Her fangs were fully extended, dripping with saliva. Her eyes were no longer just scarlet. They were burning with a blinding, white-hot hunger. Her skin had gone translucent. Veins of black hunger pulsing beneath the surface. "The field," she gasped, clutching her chest. "It is down. The hunger. I cannot control it." She looked at him, and for the first time, Kale saw true predation. She wasn't looking at him as Kale. She was looking at him as meat, as a vessel of warm, pumping blood that could stabilize her crashing system. "Get out," she snarled, slamming her fist against the glass, spiderwebbing the reinforced pain. "Run, Kale, run!" Kale's implant was firing rapidly, flagging the threat level as catastrophic. Every logical synapse in his brain told him to retreat, to lock the door, to call containment. He dropped the flashlight. "No," Kyle said. He walked toward her in the dark. "I will kill you," she screamed, crouching to spring. "I cannot stop it." "Yes, you can," Kale said calmly. He kept walking. "You are Lysaria Vex. You are not an animal." He reached her. She lunged, pinning him against the cold glass of the window. Her hands gripped his shoulders, talons digging into his flesh. She slammed him back, her mouth opening, the fangs inches from his jugular. The smell of her hunger was overwhelming, metallic and wild. Kale didn't struggle. He didn't reach for his weapon. He reached up and took her face in his hands. "Lysaria," he said. She froze, trembling so hard her armor rattled. She was hyperventilating, fighting a war inside her own body. "I need," she whimpered, the monster warring with the woman. "Blood. I need." "I know," Kyle whispered. He slowly moved his hands down. He unbuttoned the cuff of his sleeve and rolled it up, exposing his left wrist. The vein there beat steadily, a strong, rhythmic drum. He held his wrist up to her mouth. "I trust you," he said. The words hit her harder than a plasma bolt. She stared at the exposed skin, then up at his eyes. In the darkness, illuminated only by the faint starlight, she saw no judgment, no horror, just an absolute, unshakable faith in who she was. She let out a sob that sounded like a growl. She grabbed his wrist, pressing her face against it. Kale tensed, expecting the bite, but she didn't bite. She pressed her forehead against his arm, her breathing ragged, her body racking with shudders. She inhaled his scent, the life of him, and she anchored herself to it. She used the rhythm of his pulse to slow her own. For a long minute, they stood there in the dark, the predator weeping against the prey. Slowly, the white fire faded from her eyes, returning to crimson. Her fangs retracted, The tremors slowed. She pulled back, her face wet with tears. She looked at him with a mixture of awe and terror. "You offered it," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You offered me your life." "I offered you my trust," Cale corrected gently, pulling his sleeve down. "There is a difference." "I could have drained you dry," she said, looking at her own hands as if they were traitors. "I wanted to. Kyle, I wanted to hurt you." "But you didn't," he said. "That is what matters." She looked up at him, and the air between them changed again. The hunger was gone, replaced by a wrenching emotional storm. She had never been looked at like this, not by her commanders, not by her enemies, not by the politicians. To them, she was a sword to be kept in a sheath. To him, she was a person. "I have never," she started, then stopped, struggling for words. "I have never fed from someone who looked at me like I was more than a weapon." "I see you, Lysaria," Kyle said, his voice rough with emotion. "I see you." The admission hung in the silence. It was dangerous. It was a line crossed that could not be uncrossed. The cold political arrangement had shattered, and something new, something fierce and terrifyingly fragile, had taken its place. Lysaria reached out, her fingers trembling, and touched his cheek. "You are a fool. Cale Arden," she whispered. "But you are my fool." As the backup generators finally kicked in and the lights flickered back to life, they did not move apart. They stood together in the light, exhausted, terrified, and irrevocably bound. The transit through the quantum gate was not a journey. It was a violent deconstruction of reality followed by an immediate, nauseating reassembly. One moment. Kyle and Lysaria were standing on the launch pad in Earth's orbit. The next, the universe twisted inside out, and they were staring at the swirling, bruised purple storms of a gas giant named Typhon. Suspended in the planet's gravity well hung the orbital ring station Concordia. It was a masterpiece of engineering, a silver halo encircling the equator of the giant, designed to be the neutral ground where the fragile peace between humanity and the Noctri Dominion would be cemented. Cale blinked, shaking off the disorientation of the jump. His neural implant corrected his equilibrium in 0.2 seconds, but the headache lingered. Beside him, Lysaria Vex did not stumble. She merely inhaled sharply, her scarlet eyes widening as she took in the vista of the gas giant filling the viewport. "It is loud," she murmured. "The station?" Kyle asked, adjusting the cuffs of his dress uniform. "The planet," she corrected. "The magnetic field scream. It is bracing." They walked down the disembarking ramp into the grand concourse. The scale of the station was intended to humble its visitors. The ceiling was a kilometer high, transparent plasteel revealing the endless storm clouds of Typhon above. The corridor stretched for miles, lined with banners, the blue and gold of the Earth Alliance alternating with the deep crimson and black of the Noctri Dominion. For the first time in a decade, humans and Noctri walked the same halls without weapons drawn. But the tension was thick enough to choke on. Kyle watched the body language. The humans walked in tight clusters, eyes darting. The Noctri moved with predatory grace, giving the humans wide berths. Their expressions stuck between disdain and curiosity. "Smile," Kyle whispered to Lysaria as a camera drone buzzed past them. "We are the happy couple." "I am smiling," Lysaria replied, her face a mask of terrifying neutrality. "You look like you are contemplating which throat to rip out first." "I am multitasking," she said. As they moved toward the reception sector, a hand shot out from a side alcove, grabbing Cale's arm. Lysaria moved instantly, her hand blurring toward the hilt of the ceremonial blade at her hip. But Cale checked her with a subtle gesture. The man was human, older, with the gray, washed-out look of someone who had spent too many years in deep-cover intelligence. "Silas?" Cale said, surprise cracking his professional veneer. "I thought you were dead in the Zeta sector." Silas ignored the greeting. He looked at Lysaria with open fear, then leaned close to Cale. "Listen to me. You need to get her out of here. The station is not secure." "We have 3 battalions of joint security," Kyle said, his voice low. "Security is the problem," Silas hissed. His eyes were bloodshot. "Not everyone wants this alliance to last, Cale. There are moving parts here that do not fit. Watch your back, and watch hers." Before Cale could press for details, Silas melted back into the crowd, disappearing into a stream of maintenance workers. Lysaria watched him go, her nostrils flaring. "He smelled of fear," she said, "and chemical propellants. He has been handling explosives." "Silas was the best counter-intel officer I ever worked with," Cale said, his stomach tightening. "If he is scared, we should be terrified." The official tour of the Noctri wing was meant to be a diplomatic triumph. The architecture shifted from human utilitarianism to the organic, flowing lines of Noctri design. The walls here were grown, not built, humming with a low-level bioluminescence. Ambassador Vaughn led the delegation, gesturing proudly to the living sculptures and the nutrient fountains. Cale stayed close to Lysaria, his eyes scanning the crowd, Silas's warning replaying in his mind. Lysaria stopped abruptly in the middle of a corridor. The rest of the delegation continued a few paces before realizing the guest of honor was no longer with them. "Lady Vex?" a human diplomat asked nervously. Lysaria ignored him. She walked to the wall, placing her hand against the pulsing dark material. She closed her eyes. "Cale," she said softly. He was at her side in an instant. "What is it?" "The resonance," she whispered. "Do you feel it?" "I feel a wall," Cale said. "It is wrong," she said, her voice tightening. "This sector was grown using standard Dominion protocols, but the energy signature, it is twisted. It feels ancient, like the echo of a scream." She pulled her hand back as if the wall had bitten her. "This structure has been tampered with. There is something in the veins of this station that does not belong." Before Cale could answer, the lights died. It was not a flicker. It was a hard kill. The bioluminescence in the walls turned from a soothing violet to a sickly, pulsing red. The gravity plating groaned, fluctuating wildly before stabilizing. Then the screaming started. "Down!" Cale roared, tackling the diplomat next to him just as the wall exploded. The blast was precise, surgical. It tore through the corridor, venting atmosphere and sending shrapnel slicing through the air. Emergency bulkheads slammed down, sealing the breach, but the chaos had already begun. From the ventilation shafts, shapes descended. They were small, fast, and silent, stealth drones. But they were not Alliance design, and they were not Dominion. They were matte black, shaped like insects, armed with microplasma cutters. "We are under attack," Cale shouted into his comms. "Command, we have hostiles in the Noctri wing." Static. The jamming was absolute. A drone dive-bombed the group, its cutter glowing white-hot. Lysaria moved. She did not wait for her guards. She did not wait for orders. She became a blur of motion, a shadow detached from the dark. She intercepted the drone in mid-air, her living armor extending a rigid spike from her forearm that skewered the machine. She spun, hurling the wreckage into a second drone with force enough to shatter both. "Cale!" she barked. "Get them to cover!" Cale scrambled up, pulling the diplomat to his feet. "Move! Into the secondary atrium! Go!" More drones poured from the ceiling. They were targeting the humans specifically. A beam of plasma arced toward a group of terrified aides. Lysaria slid across the floor, her armor expanding into a shield that absorbed the impact. The smell of ozone and burning flesh filled the air. She was magnificent and terrifying. She moved with a lethal grace that defied physics, deflecting fire with her gauntlets, cutting through metal casings with her ceremonial blade. She wasn't just fighting. She was dancing a waltz of destruction. But there were too many of them. "I need access!" Kyle yelled, ducking behind a pillar as plasma scored the wall above his head. "They have hijacked the station defenses." He spotted a maintenance terminal on the far wall. It was exposed, 50 feet of open killing ground between him and it. He looked at Lysaria. She was holding off 6 drones, her back to him. "Lysaria!" he shouted. "The terminal, I need 10 seconds." She didn't turn. She didn't nod. She simply shifted her stance. With a roar that shook the deck plates, she launched herself into the center of the drone swarm, drawing every ounce of fire onto herself. "Go!" she screamed. Kale sprinted. His neural implant took over, analyzing the trajectory of the plasma bolts, calculating the optimal path. He slid under a burst of fire, rolled, and slammed into the terminal. His fingers flew across the interface. Come on. The system was locked down, eaten alive by a virus that felt terrifyingly familiar. It was the same hybrid code from the bug in their apartment. "I see you," Kyle muttered, his mind syncing with the data stream. "You are routing the attack through the environmental scrubbers." He bypassed the firewall, not trying to stop the virus, but to redirect it. He located the gravity controls for the corridor. "Lysaria, jump!" She didn't hesitate. She launched herself upward. Kale slammed the enter key. The gravity in the corridor inverted for 3 seconds. The drones, simple machines relying on repulsor lifts, were slammed violently into the ceiling. The humans and Lysaria, warned or reacting with instinct, held onto the anchored fixtures. The drones shattered on impact. Kale restored gravity. Metal rained down like hail. Lysaria landed in a crouch, breathing hard, her armor smoking. She looked at Kale, a fierce, wild grin touching her lips. "Adequate strategy. Husband." "I try," Kale panted, but the reprieve was short. The holographic screens lining the corridor flickered to life. The emergency broadcast system had been overridden. On every screen, a video played. It was grainy, high-contrast footage. It showed the explosion that had just occurred. But in this version, it wasn't a drone that caused it. It was Lysaria. The doctored footage showed her slaughtering the human guards, planting the charge, and signaling the attack. It was a flawless deep fake. "Attention!" A computerized voice boomed over the station speakers. "Betrayal detected. The war bride Lysaria Vex has initiated a hostile purge. All Alliance personnel are authorized to terminate on sight. The treaty is void." Kyle stared at the screen in horror. "They are framing you. They are broadcasting this to Earth." "Then we have no allies," Lysaria said, her voice cold. "The humans will try to kill me. My people will think I have gone rogue and try to kill me to save face." "We need to leave," Kyle said. "Now. The docking bays." They ran. The station was a nightmare. Corridors were collapsing, venting smoke. They fought their way through maintenance shafts, avoiding the main patrols. Kyle used his clearance codes to open blast doors, while Lysaria neutralized the automated turrets that had turned against them. They moved as a single organism. Kale the eyes, Lysaria the claws. They reached Docking Bay 4. It was sabotaged. The airlock was jammed, and the fuel lines had been cut. "Trap," Lysaria hissed, spinning around. From the shadows of the loading gantry, a figure emerged. He was tall, dressed in stealth armor, his face covered by a tactical mask. But he didn't move like a soldier. He moved like Lysaria. "End of the line," the figure said. His voice was distorted, synthesized. He lunged. The speed was impossible for a human. He crossed the distance in a blink, slamming into Lysaria with the force of a freight train. They crashed into a stack of cargo crates, metal screeching. Kyle drew his sidearm and fired, but the figure moved too fast. The assassin backhanded Lysaria, sending her skidding across the deck, and turned on Kale. He grabbed Kale by the throat and lifted him one-handed. Kale kicked, gasping, but the grip was iron. "Weak!" the assassin sneered. Lysaria roared. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. She didn't use a weapon. She tackled the assassin, tearing him away from Kale. They rolled across the floor, a blur of limbs and strikes. The assassin was strong, perhaps stronger than her, but he lacked her discipline. He fought like a berserker. Lysaria fought like a surgeon. She caught his arm, twisted it until the bone snapped with a wet crack, and drove her knee into his chest. He collapsed, wheezing. Lysaria pinned him, her hand gripping his mask. "What are you?" she hissed. She ripped the mask off. Kyle gasped. The face beneath was a horror show. It was human, but the skin was gray and necrotic. The eyes were solid black. No sclera. Veins of glowing noctri circuitry had been stitched directly into the flesh of the face, pulsing with a sick yellow light. "A hybrid," Kale whispered. "They are splicing noctri DNA into human soldiers." The assassin grinned, blood bubbling between his teeth. "The future," he gurgled. "We are the future." "Who sent you?" Lysaria demanded, tightening her grip on his throat. "Speak." "The Ascended," he choked out. "The old blood rises." A high-pitched whine emitted from the assassin's chest. "Kill switch," Kyle shouted. "Back!" He grabbed Lysaria's harness and threw them both backward. The assassin didn't explode. He disintegrated. A wave of nanoscopic shards erupted from his pores, eating the flesh and bone in seconds. Within a heartbeat, there was nothing left but a pile of gray ash and a scorched mark on the deck plating. Lysaria stood up, shaking the ash from her armor. She looked at the floor. The burn mark had formed a shape, a circle with 3 inverted daggers. "I know this mark," she whispered, her voice trembling with a rare fear. "It is the crest of the Crimson Wake, a warrior cult that was purged by the Dominion 3 centuries ago. They believed in total war, eternal war." "Well, someone brought them back," Kyle said grimly, "and they just tried to start the apocalypse." "Security is coming," Lysaria said, her ears twitching. "I hear heavy boots." "There," Kale pointed to a small unmarked shuttle in the far corner of the bay. "That is not on the manifest. It must be the extraction ship for the assassin." They sprinted for it. Kale hacked the door lock while Lysaria covered him. The lock disengaged, and they threw themselves inside. "Strap in!" Kale yelled, jumping into the pilot's seat. "I am going to fly this thing like I stole it, which I did." The shuttle engines flared to life. As they lifted off, the bay doors began to close. Security was trying to seal them in. "Hold on!" Kale punched the throttle. The shuttle shot forward, turning sideways to slip through the narrowing gap of the bay doors. Metal shrieked on metal as the hull scraped the closing teeth of the station. They burst out into the void of space. "We are clear!" Kyle shouted, but the station's external defenses were waiting. A web of laser fire lit up the dark. "Evasive maneuvers!" Lysaria yelled from the co-pilot seat. Kale threw the shuttle into a corkscrew spin. The inertial dampeners whined in protest. A laser battery clipped their port wing, sending a violent shudder through the frame. "Shields are down!" Kale shouted. "I can't shake the tracking lock!" "Turn into the storm!" Lysaria ordered. "The magnetic interference of the planet will blind their sensors." "That will kill us." "It might kill us," she corrected. "Staying here will definitely kill us." Kale gritted his teeth and banked hard. diving toward the swirling purple clouds of the gas giant. The shuttle groaned as it hit the upper atmosphere. Turbulence rattled their teeth. Something slammed into the hull. A piece of shrapnel from the damaged wing tore through the cockpit plating. Cale jerked violently in his seat. A spray of red coated the instrument panel. "Cale!" Lysaria unbuckled, scrambling toward him. "I am fine," Cale gasped, his hands white-knuckled on the yoke. "I am—" His voice failed. He slumped forward. Lysaria grabbed the controls, pulling the shuttle out of its dive and stabilizing it in a drift orbit within the cloud layer. The sensors went dark. They were hidden. She turned to Cale. A jagged piece of metal was embedded in his neck, just above the collarbone. It had nicked the carotid artery. Blood, bright oxygenated arterial blood, was pulsing out in a steady, terrifying rhythm. "No!" Lysaria breathed. "No! No! No!" She ripped the emergency medkit from the wall, but it was empty. The assassin hadn't planned on needing first aid. Cale was pale, his eyes unfocused. "It is cold," he mumbled. Lysaria looked at the wound. The pressure bandage wasn't enough. He was bleeding out. Human medicine couldn't seal an artery this fast without surgery. But Noctri biology could. Her saliva contained a coagulant enzyme, a venom derivative used by her ancestors to close the wounds of their mates during ritual combat. It was a healing agent, but to use it— She looked at the blood. The scent hit her like a physical blow. She had not fed in 2 days. The stress of the battle, the energy expenditure, the proximity to the raw, metallic scent of life. Her hunger roared to the surface. Her fangs extended, aching with a need so sharp it blinded her. If she touched him, if she tasted him, could she stop? The beast inside her screamed to tear, to drink, to drain him dry. "Lysaria," Cale whispered. He was looking at her. His eyes were hazy, but he was seeing her, not the monster. Her. "I can save you," she said, her voice trembling. "But Cale, I am starving, and if I lose control—" "You won't," he wheezed. He moved his hand, his fingers brushing her face, his blood smeared on her cheek. "Do it," he said. Lysaria let out a shuddering breath. She leaned over him. She pressed her hands against his chest, feeling the beat of his heart, the heart that wasn't racing, even now. She lowered her mouth to his neck. The contact was electric. The taste of his blood on her tongue was intoxicating, better than any synthetic, richer than any wine. Her vision swam with red. The instinct to bite down, to rip, was overwhelming. "He is mine," the beast snarled. "Drink! He is Cale," she screamed back. "Save him." She licked the wound, her tongue working the enzyme deep into the tear. She pressed her lips against the injury, sealing it. She could feel his pulse against her mouth, fluttering like a trapped bird. Every second was a war. Her body shook with the effort of restraint. She drank a mouthful. She couldn't help it, but she forced herself to stop. She forced the enzyme to do its work. The bleeding slowed. The skin began to knit together, reacting to the alien biology. She pulled back, gasping, her mouth stained crimson. She scrambled away from him, backing into the far wall of the cockpit, terrified of herself. Cale took a deep breath, then another. The color was returning to his face. He reached up and touched his neck. The wound was a jagged pink scar, sealed shut. He looked at her. She was huddled in the corner, eyes wide, wiping her mouth frantically. "Lysaria," he said. His voice was stronger. "I tasted you," she whispered, horrified. "I wanted more. Cale, I almost—" "But you didn't," he said. He unbuckled his harness and stumbled toward her. He fell to his knees in front of her. "Stay back," she warned. "I am dangerous. You are my partner." he said. He reached out and took her hands. They were covered in his blood. You saved my life. I am a monster, she said, tears cutting tracks through the blood on her face. You are the woman who just pulled me back from the dark, Kale said firmly. He squeezed her hands. We are in this now. No more politics, no more treaties, just us. The silence in the shuttle was heavy, filled with the hum of the life support and the beating of two hearts. The bond between them had shifted tectonically. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was an intimacy forged in blood and terror. Kale looked at the navigation console. The data drive they had stolen from the assassin was plugged in. Decrypting. A holographic image floated above the dash. It was the symbol. The circle with the 3 inverted daggers. The Crimson Wake, Kale said, his voice hard. We find them. We find the people who did this. Lysaria looked at the symbol, then back at Kale. The fear in her eyes hardened into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. She wiped the last of the blood from her lip. They tried to turn me into a villain, she said. They tried to kill you. She stood up, pulling Kale to his feet. Let us show them what a real war looks like, she said. Kale nodded. He engaged the stealth drive, and the shuttle vanished into the shadow of the gas giant, leaving the burning station and their old lives behind. The stealth shuttle was a metallic sliver drifting through the debris field of the fringe sectors. For 2 weeks. Kale and Lysaria had lived in the cramped cockpit, surviving on ration packs and the relentless drive to uncover the truth. They had followed the trail of the Crimson Wake, the ancient warrior cult, across 3 star systems, picking at the scabs of the old war. Their destination was a dead moon in the shadow of a brown dwarf star. On the charts, it was designated as a hazardous waste dump. In the encrypted files they had stolen, it was listed as black site ocular. Atmosphere is toxic, Kale said, reading the sensors. Sulfur and ionized dust. We will need suits until we breach the airlock. Lysaria did not answer immediately. She was staring at the jagged surface of the moon. Her armor, usually shifting with a slow, hypnotic rhythm, was still hardened into a matte carapace. I can hear it, she whispered. The wind? Kale asked. The echoes, she said. Pain leaves a frequency. Kale, this place screams. They landed in a crater obscured by dust storms. The facility was buried deep, a brutalist slab of concrete and reinforced steel that had been clawed into the rock. The airlock hissed open, admitting them into a corridor that smelled of stale air and old antiseptics. It was a graveyard of science. As they walked deeper, the facility's automated systems woke up. Motion sensors triggered holographic logs that had been dormant for decades. Ghostly blue figures flickered into existence around them, human scientists in white coats, Noctri prisoners in containment fields. Kyle watched in sickened silence as a hologram played out a torture session. A Noctri warrior was strapped to a table, subjected to sonic frequencies that made his blood boil. The scientists were taking notes, their voices dispassionate. Subject 4-7 displays heightened aggression when exposed to the fear frequency, a holographic doctor droned. Cortisol levels in the human control group spike in sympathy. The psychic resonance is confirmed. Lysaria walked through the hologram, her face a mask of stone. She stopped at a main console in the central lab. It was a massive room, lined with empty stasis tanks that were large enough to hold things that were not quite human and not quite Noctri. This was not just a prison, Kale said, hacking the terminal. It was a breeding ground. They were trying to splice the species, then look at the dates. This started 5 years before the war officially began. We were never enemies, Lysaria said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. We were test subjects. The war, It was just a field test for their weapons. Kale's screen flashed red. A file opened, tagged with a high-priority clearance. It was labeled Project Pantheon. Subfile, Bloodline Vex. Lysaria, Kale warned. You might not want to see this. She shoved him aside, not gently. Her eyes scanned the scrolling text. The Vex bloodline possesses a unique genetic marker inherited from the matriarch era. Their biofield acts as a natural amplifier for psychic resonance. If properly stimulated, a Vex subject can serve as a living key to activate the Titan-class hypno-emitters buried in the Earth crust. Theoretical outcome: total planetary submission through induced neurochemical terror. Lysaria stepped back. The color drained from her face, leaving her gray. A key, she whispered. I am not a diplomat. I am not a warrior. I am a key. She looked at her hands. They did not bring me to Earth for peace. They brought me there to plug me into a machine and use my blood to enslave your entire species. The rage hit her like a physical blow. No! She screamed. She spun around and drove her fist into the console. The metal crumpled like paper. Sparks showered the room. She didn't stop. She tore the monitor from its mounting and hurled it across the lab. She smashed a glass stasis tank, sending shards skittering across the floor. Lysaria! Kyle shouted, stepping toward her. Do not touch me! She roared. She spun on him, her fangs fully extended, her eyes burning with a chaotic white-hot light. She looked wild, broken, terrifying. I am a monster, look at me! I was designed for this. My blood is poison. My history is a lie. She advanced on him, backing him against a wall. Her claws were inches from his chest. Why are you not running? She screamed, tears of black blood leaking from her eyes. I am the weapon that will end your world. Run, you fool. Kyle did not run. He did not flinch. He looked at the claws that could disembowel him, and then he looked up at her face. No, Kale said firmly. I am a curse. You are Lysaria, Kale said. He reached out and took hold of her wrists. She was strong enough to snap his bones, but he held on. You are the woman who saved me in the shuttle. You are the one who refused to kill the guards on the station. You are the one who likes bad action movies and hates synthetic coffee. That is a lie, she sobbed, her strength faltering. This file, it says I am. The file says what they wanted you to be, Kale interrupted, his voice fierce. It does not say who you are. They do not get to decide that. History does not get to decide that. You do. He pulled her hands down, pressing them against his chest, over his heart. Feel that? He asked. Steady. I am not afraid of the weapon, and I am not afraid of you. I am afraid for you. Lysaria let out a wretched sound, half sob, half growl. The fight went out of her. She collapsed forward, her forehead resting against his shoulder, her body shaking with the force of her grief. I do not want to be this, she wept. I do not want to be the reason everyone screams. Then we make sure you are not, Kale said, wrapping his arms around her, holding her tight in the cold, dead dark of the lab. We burn their plans down, every single one of them. The trail led them out of the fringe and into the heart of the corruption. The Gilded Lotus was a floating casino city orbiting the mining moon of Avaris. It was a place of grotesque opulence, a glittering jewel of vice where the ultra-rich of both species came to launder money and trade secrets. It was owned by the Zenith Corporation, a shell company that Kale had linked to the Crimson Wake. To get to the servers in the penthouse, they had to walk through the front door. I hate this, Lysaria muttered. They were in the lift, ascending toward the Grand Gala. She was wearing a gown they had fabricated in the shuttle's synthesizer, a garment of midnight blue silk that left her back exposed, clinging to her like a second skin. It was designed to distract, and it was working. "You look breathtaking," Cale said, adjusting the collar of his suit. He was dressed not as an officer, but as a consort. High-collared velvet, decorative chains, no rank insignia. The visual language was clear. She was the power. He was the accessory. "I feel naked without my armor," she hissed, "and you look like a pet." "That is the point," Kyle said. "We play the roles. You are the arrogant, bored Noctri nobility. I am your human toy. It explains why we are here. Decadence, not espionage." The doors opened onto the gala floor. The noise was a wall of sound, crystal glasses clinking, synthesized jazz, the hum of conversation. The room was filled with humans in jewels and Noctri in ceremonial silks. Lysaria stepped out, her chin high, her eyes sweeping the room with icy disdain. Cale followed a step behind, head slightly bowed, heads turned. Whispers rippled through the room. "Is that her? The war bride? Look at the human. Pathetic." Lysaria ignored them, moving toward the VIP section where the Zenith executives were holding court. A waiter offered her a tray of drinks. She looked at it as if it were a plate of dead rats. "Take it," she commanded Cale, not looking at him. "Yes, mistress," Cale said, taking a glass. He felt a flush of humiliation that he quickly suppressed. It was just a role, but seeing the way the other humans looked at him with pity and disgust was harder than he expected. They reached the dance floor. The orchestra began a slow, rhythmic piece, a fusion of earth strings and Noctri percussion. "We need to get closer to the CEO," Kyle murmured, leaning in as if to adjust her shawl. "He is wearing a biometric key on his lapel. I need to scan it." "He is watching us," Lysaria said, her lips barely moving. "He suspects." "Then we give him a show," Kyle said. "Dance with me." Lysaria turned to him. "Here? It is a gala, Lady Vex. It would be rude not to." She hesitated, then extended her hand. Cale took it, pulling her onto the floor. It was not a gentle dance. It was a duel. Lysaria moved with a fluid, predatory power, testing his lead. Kyle matched her, his steps precise. He placed his hand on the small of her back, feeling the tension in her muscles. "Relax," he whispered. "You are stiff." "I'm surrounded by enemies," she replied, her eyes scanning the perimeter. "And you are holding me too close." "It is a tango," Kyle said. "There is no such thing as too close." He spun her, dipping her low. Her hair cascaded down, brushing the floor. The crowd gasped. For a moment, the mission vanished. There was only the heat of her body against his, the smell of ozone and spice, the way her scarlet eyes locked onto his. He pulled her back up, chest to chest, her breath hitched. "They are watching," she whispered, but her voice was breathless. "Let them watch," Cale said. He slid his hand up her neck, his thumb resting on her pulse point. It was fast, faster than he had ever felt it. "Your heart is racing," he noted softly. "It is the adrenaline," she lied. "Is it?" He spun her again, moving her closer to the edge of the floor where the CEO stood watching with a glass of brandy. As they whirled past, Cale's other hand brushed against the CEO's arm, a clumsy bump, an apology, a bow. "Forgive me, sir," Kyle mumbled, bowing his head. "Watch yourself, boy," the CEO sneered. Kyle straightened, returning to Lysaria's arms. As they moved away, a small green light blinked on his cufflink. "Got it," he whispered. "Let us go." They did not go to the servers immediately. The security rotation was tight. They had to wait for the shift change at 3 in the morning. They retreated to the suite Zenith had provided for distinguished guests. It was a lavish room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the mining moon below. The moment the door locked, the masks fell off. Lysaria tore off the silk shawl, throwing it onto the floor. I wanted to kill him, she paced. The way he looked at you, like you were furniture. It worked, Cale said, loosening his collar. He felt wired, the adrenaline from the theft and the dance still coursing through him. We have the key. It was humiliating, she spat. You are a warrior, Cale, not a servant. I did what I had to do, Cale snapped, his own temper flaring. Stop trying to protect my honor, Lysaria. I am a big boy. I can handle a few sneers. It is not about your honor, she shouted, turning on him. It is about the fact that I could smell your desire on the dance floor. The silence that followed was deafening. Kyle stared at her. What? Do not lie to me. She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. I felt it. When you held me, you were not acting. You wanted me. And if I did, Cale challenged, stepping into her space. Is that a crime? Or are you just terrified because you felt it too? Lysaria froze. She opened her mouth to argue, but the words died. She looked at him, really looked at him, the man who had stood by her in the fire, who had offered her his blood, who had danced with her in the lion's den. She faltered. I am dangerous to you. I'm tired of hearing that, Cale said. He reached out and took her face in his hands. This time, she didn't pull away. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was fierce, desperate, a collision of two people who had been living on the edge of death for weeks. Lysaria made a sound in her throat, a low growl, and grabbed his lapels, pulling him closer. They stumbled back, hitting the wall. Kyle's hands were in her hair. Her hands were tearing at the buttons of his velvet jacket. The hunger was there, sharp and undeniable. She kissed his jaw, his neck. Her fangs grazed his skin. Cale gasped, his head falling back. Lysaria. She froze against his neck. Her breathing was ragged. She could hear his blood pumping, singing to her. The desire and the hunger were twisted together, a double helix of need. She pulled back, trembling violently. Her eyes were dilated, the scarlet consuming the white. Stop, she gasped, pushing him away. Stop! I cannot. Cale, I cannot control it. If we do this, I might hurt you. Cale stood there, chest heaving, his shirt half open. He looked at her, at the fear in her eyes. He saw the predator pacing behind the woman. He didn't step forward. He stayed where he was. You can control it, he said, his voice rough but steady. But I will not ask you to risk it if you are not sure. I want you, she admitted, the words tearing out of her. I want everything. But I am afraid that if I taste you again, I will not stop. Cale slowly buttoned his shirt. He walked over to her, not to touch her, but to stand with her. Then we wait, he said. We wait until you know you can stop. I am not going anywhere. He reached out and took her hand. I want all of you, Lysaria, including the part that scares you, but only if you choose me freely. Not out of hunger, not out of fear of losing me. Just you. She looked at their joined hands. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the red in her eyes fading to a dull simmer. You are a stubborn man, she whispered. So I have been told. That night, they did not sleep apart. They lay on the massive bed, fully clothed, wrapped around each other. Lysaria rested her head on his chest, listening to his heart. It was a torture and a comfort. She fell asleep to the rhythm of the life she had sworn to protect, anchored by the boundary he had been strong enough to set. At 3 in the morning, The alarm on Kale's internal clock woke him. He gently untangled himself from Lysaria's arms. She woke instantly, her hand going to the invisible blade she no longer wore. "It is time," Kale whispered. They used the biometric key to access the secure server node in the suite's wall safe, a direct line to the Zenith mainframe. Kale plugged in the drive. The data streamed across the holographic display. It was worse than they had imagined. "Look at the dates," Kyle pointed. "The summit." The peace summit was scheduled for 3 days from now. It was to be held in the newly constructed Unity Spire in Earth's capital, the same building where Lysaria had first arrived. "The structure," Lysaria pointed to the blueprints. "It is not a building. It is a conduction rod. It sits directly on top of the ancient cache," Kyle realized, reading the specs. "The spire is designed to channel psychic energy down into the bedrock, into the weapon." He opened the operations file. Operation Silence. Phase Final. Objective: activation of the hypno-emitter. Trigger: blood sacrifice of subject Vex Alpha within the amplification chamber. Method: stage terrorist attack during the summit. Public execution of the war bride to incite maximum emotional resonance. "They are going to kill me," Lysaria said, her voice flat. "On live television, and use my death to scream fear into the minds of every being on the planet." "The weapon does not just make people afraid," Kale said, reading the fine print. "It rewrites neural pathways. It makes them docile, subservient. The cabal, the executives and the elders, they want to rule a world of sheep." He looked at Lysaria. "We have to go back. Back to Earth?" Lysaria asked. "Kale, we are the most wanted fugitives in the system. The moment we enter orbital space, the defense grid will vaporize us. If we don't go back, everyone we know becomes a slave," Kyle said. "Thorn, my team, your people." Lysaria walked to the window, looking out at the stars. She touched the glass, her reflection staring back. A warrior, a monster, a woman. "We will be walking into a slaughterhouse," she said. "Yes," Kyle agreed. She turned to him. A small, fierce smile played on her lips. It wasn't the smile of a monster. It was the smile of a hero who had nothing left to lose. "Then we had better make sure we are the ones holding the knife," she said. Kale grabbed his jacket. "Grab your gear. Lady Vex, we have a wedding to crash." They left the suite, leaving the stolen data wiping itself behind them. As they headed for the shuttle bay, Kale took her hand. This time, he didn't let go. They were terrifyingly outnumbered, labeled as traitors, and heading toward a death trap. But for the first time in his life, Kale Arden wasn't just managing his fear. He was choosing it, and he was choosing her. 3 days, he said as the airlock cycled. "Plenty of time," Lysaria replied, checking the charge on her gauntlets. "I can conquer a world in 2. "Let us settle for saving one," Kale said. The shuttle blasted off from the moon, burning hard for the hypergate that would take them home. First phase complete, beginning final descent. Then the stars stretched into lines of light, and they were gone. The return to Earth was a descent into the throat of a dying beast. They did not arrive with the pomp and terror of a dread cruiser. Instead, Kale Arden and Lysaria Vex arrived in the belly of a cargo hauler carrying synthetic grain, slipping through the orbital blockade using codes Kale had memorized from a dead man's datapad. The megacity that greeted them was not the vibrant, neon-pulsing metropolis they had left. It was a city under siege by its own paranoia. Rain lashed the gray permacrete of the lower levels, mixing with the steam venting from the geothermal pipes. Every holographic billboard, usually flashing advertisements for off-world vacations or neural mods, was now a monolith of propaganda. They showed grainy, looped footage of the station explosion, the face of Lysaria Vex superimposed with jagged red warnings. Traitor. Monster. Kill on sight. They did a thorough job, Lysaria murmured. She was crouched in the shadow of a service tunnel, her distinctive white hair hidden beneath a heavy, grease-stained hood. Her living armor had retracted beneath a scavenger's ragged coat, but Cale could feel the tension radiating off her. I look like a demon from your religious texts. Marketing was always humanity's strongest weapon, Cale whispered back, checking the perimeter with a handheld scanner. We need to keep moving. The biometric scanners are active on the main concourse. They moved through the forgotten veins of the city, the old transit lines that had been abandoned when the gravity trains took over. The tunnels were damp, smelling of rust and decay, a stark contrast to the sterile, deadly elegance of the space station. They found Silas in a sub-basement beneath a noodle bar in Sector 4. The old intelligence officer looked worse than he had on the station. His left arm was in a sling, and he was surrounded by a nest of jury-rigged servers and monitors. You look like hell, Silas, Kyle said, stepping into the dim light. Silas didn't flinch. He spun his chair around, a pulse pistol leveled at Cale's chest before he recognized them. He lowered the weapon with a sigh that rattled his lungs. And you look like a dead man walking, Silas rasped. He looked at Lysaria, his eyes narrowing. And the Lady Death herself? You two have been busy. The entire planetary defense grid is looking for your heat signatures. We found the source, Cale said, skipping the pleasantries. He threw a data chip onto the table. Project Pantheon. The Crimson Wake. It is all connected. The Peace Summit is a trap. Silas plugged the chip in. As the data scrolled across his screens, his face went pale. Mother of God. They are not just sabotaging the peace, they are building a neural prison. The summit, Lysaria said, her voice sharp. Where is it being held? The Unity Spire, Silas said, pulling up a schematic. New construction supposed to be a symbol of the Alliance. It is built directly over the geothermal tap in the city center. But look at the power draw. It is massive, Cale noted. That is not for lights and air conditioning. It is a conduction rod, Lysaria said, tracing the line of the spire on the screen. It goes deep, down to the crust, to the weapon. The summit starts in 3 hours, Silas said, checking a timer. The president, the Noctri High Council, the corporate heads, they are all gathering there. If they trigger that weapon while the leadership is in the room, they enslave the leaders. They enslave the populations. Cale finished. We have to get in. Impossible, Silas said. The spire is locked down tighter than a vacuum seal. Joint security, anti-grav drones, biometric locks that read DNA sequences. Good thing we have the best burglar in the galaxy, Cale said, looking at Lysaria. And the only human crazy enough to be her husband, Lysaria added dryly. The Unity Spire pierced the cloud layer, a needle of glass and white metal that seemed to hum with potential energy. At its base, the plaza was crowded with tanks and nervous soldiers. But 50 stories up, on the maintenance cladding, there were no soldiers. The wind howled, tearing at Cale's magnetic grip gloves. They were scaling the exterior of the spire, a vertiginous climb that turned the cars below into streams of light. I really need to talk to you about better honeymoon destinations, Cale shouted over the wind, his muscles burning as he hauled himself up a sheer pane of glass. Lysaria was 20 feet above him, moving with the unnatural, sticky grace of a spider. Her claws had extended just enough to pierce the molecular bond of the glass, giving her perfect purchase. If we survive this, her voice came over the comms, clear and amused. I demand a planet that does not try to kill us every week. Perhaps a water world, I enjoy swimming. Noted, Kyle grunted. Waterworld, no killer robots, no ancient cults. Less talking, more climbing. Husband. The ventilation intake is 10 meters up. They reached the intake vent. Lysaria sliced through the locking mechanism with a single swipe of her gauntlet. They slipped inside, leaving the howling wind behind for the sterile hum of the spire's internal systems. Now, the dance began. They moved through the service corridors like ghosts. This was where their partnership ceased to be two people and became a single entity. Kale took point on the electronic locks, his neural implant interfacing with the security nodes. Looping camera feeds and disabling sensors split seconds before they triggered. Lysaria took point on the physical threats. They rounded a corner and walked straight into a patrol of 3 elite guards. Before the guards could raise their rifles, Lysaria was a blur of motion. She didn't kill them. She moved too fast for them to track, striking pressure points with surgical precision, a chop to the neck, a knee to the solar plexus, a sweep of the legs. In 3 seconds, the guards were unconscious on the floor. Clean, she whispered. Looping the feed, Kyle replied, tapping his wrist display. As far as command knows, Sector 9 is all quiet. They descended. The architecture changed the lower they went. The clean human lines of the upper levels gave way to something darker, more organic. The walls here pulsed with a faint violet light, the hybrid technology that the Cabal had been perfecting for decades. We are close, Lysaria said. She stopped, her hand pressing against the wall. I can feel it. The resonance. It is hungry. The core chamber should be just below the main assembly hall, Kale said. We need to bypass the biometric seal on the lift. No time, Lysaria said. She pointed to the floor. We go through. She activated the high-frequency cutter in her gauntlet. With a shriek of tortured metal, she carved a hole in the floor plating. They dropped through, landing in the crawl space above the core chamber. Kale looked through the grate and felt his breath catch. The chamber was cavernous, hollowed out of the bedrock. In the center stood the ultra-weapon. It was a colossal crystalline structure, jagged and beautiful, glowing with a malevolent, shifting light. It looked like a frozen explosion suspended in a web of cables and conduits that throbbed with psychic energy. Around the base of the crystal, technicians in white suits moved with purpose. And on a raised platform overlooking the machine stood 3 figures. General Holloway, his dress uniform pristine, the Noctri elder Var, draped in ceremonial robes that hid his treachery, and the CEO of Zenith, looking at the weapon like it was a pile of gold. The resonance is peaking. Var's voice drifted up, amplified by the acoustics of the chamber. The audience is in place above. The fear in the room is delicious. They are terrified of an attack which makes their minds soft, pliable. Start the sequence, the CEO ordered. Bring the subject online. We are the subject, Lysaria whispered, her eyes burning. We take them now, Kale said. I go for the console. You take the leadership. On my mark, Lysaria said. She kicked the grate out. They fell. Lysaria landed in a superhero crouch, the impact cracking the floor. Kale rolled, coming up with his scavenged pulse rifle raised. General! Kale shouted. Party is over! The room erupted. Guards poured from the side entrances. These weren't standard military, they were the hybrids, masked, fast, and lethal. Kill them! Holloway screamed, retreating behind the crystal. Lysaria intercepted the first wave of hybrids. It was a whirlwind of violence. She moved like liquid smoke, her blades flashing. But there were too many of them, and they were enhanced with Noctri speed. Kyle sprinted for the control console, firing bursts to keep the heads of the technicians down. I need to shut it down, he yelled. Kale, behind you! Lysaria shouted. Kale spun, but too late. The heavy fist of a hybrid soldier slammed into his chest. The impact threw him 10 feet across the room. He crashed into a rack of servers, his rifle skittering away. He tried to stand, but a boot slammed into his ribs, cracking them. A heavy stun baton drove into his spine. His neural implant sparked, sending white-hot agony through his skull. "Secure the female," Var commanded. "Do not kill her. We need the blood." Lysaria saw Kale fall. She roared, turning to reach him, but 4 hybrids tackled her simultaneously. They fired suppression cables, wrapping her limbs in high tensile wire. She strained against them, her muscles tearing, her armor screeching. But a 5th guard jammed a neural shock prod into the base of her neck. She collapsed, gasping, her vision graying out. "Drag her to the harness," Holloway ordered, stepping out from cover. Kale groaned, forcing his eyes open. He was dragged by 2 guards and thrown to his knees in front of the platform. Blood ran down his forehead into his eyes. He watched helplessly as they hauled Lysaria to the base of the crystal. They strapped her into a vertical harness of chrome and glass. Needles slid from the frame, positioning themselves over the major arteries in her neck and wrists. "Beautiful," Var murmured, stroking the side of Lysaria's face. She spat at him, the black blood sizzling on the floor. "You are a parasite," she hissed. "You betray your own kind." "I save my kind," Var corrected. "Order, Lysaria. That is what we offer, a galaxy without the chaos of choice." "By turning us into slaves?" Kyle choked out. The CEO laughed. "Slaves? No, employees, loyal consumers, soldiers who do not question." He nodded to a technician. "Inject the stimulant." A mechanical arm descended, driving a syringe into Lysaria's shoulder. She screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of raw, chemical terror. The serum was designed to overload her adrenal system, to force her biofield to radiate pure, distilled panic. The crystal began to sing. It glowed brighter, pulsing in time with Lysaria's frantic heartbeat. The air in the room grew heavy, oppressive. Kale felt it, a wave of irrational dread washing over him. The desire to curl up and die, the certainty that hope was a lie. "It is working," Holloway grinned. "The fear is feeding the emitter. In 5 minutes, we will broadcast this frequency to the summit, then to the city." Kale fought against the hands holding him. "Lysaria," he shouted. "Look at me." Lysaria was thrashing in the harness, her eyes rolling back. The beast was taking over. The terror was consuming her mind. "Look at me," Kyle roared, his voice cutting through the psychic noise. Lysaria's head snapped up. Through the haze of red panic, she found him. She saw Kale, bleeding, beaten, on his knees with a gun to his head. But he wasn't looking at the gun. He was looking at her, and his eyes were steady. "Don't let them choose who you are," Kale said, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper that somehow carried across the room. "You are not the fear. You are the fire." "Why aren't you afraid?" the voice in her head whispered. "Because I choose not to be." Kale's silence answered. Something snapped inside Lysaria, not a bone but a chain. She looked at the men torturing her. She looked at the crystal that wanted to drink her terror, and she realized, with a clarity that was colder than space, that she would rather die than give them what they wanted. She stopped fighting the harness. She stopped screaming. She closed her eyes and took a breath. "What is she doing?" Var asked, stepping back nervously. "The readings. The fear spike is dropping." "Increase the dosage," Holloway shouted. "No," Lysaria whispered. She opened her eyes. They were not red. They were white. She turned the hunger inward. She took the terror, the pain, the chemical fire in her veins, And she didn't project it. She swallowed it. She compressed it into a singularity of pure will. "I am not your victim," she said. She flexed her arms. The high tensile cables groaned. The metal harness began to warp. With a sound like a thunderclap, she shattered the restraints. Shards of chrome flew like shrapnel. She hit the floor running. She was a blur, faster than the eye could follow. She didn't go for the guards. She went for the machine. She moved through the technicians, sweeping them aside with precise non-lethal strikes, disabling them without slowing down. She reached the main conduits feeding the crystal. "Stop her!" the CEO screamed. Cale made his move. He slammed his head backward into the nose of the guard holding him. As the guard reeled, Cale grabbed his sidearm, spun, and shot the second guard in the leg. He didn't run for cover. He ran for the interface console. Lysaria reached the conduits. She didn't rip them out. She grabbed the negative and positive flow regulators and jammed them together. Sparks showered the room. The crystal shrieked, the light turning chaotic. "Cale," she shouted. "The resonance is destabilized. We need a new signal." Cale slid across the floor, slamming into the main console. His hands flew across the keys. He found the input port for the psychic modulator. "I am plugging in," Kyle yelled. "Neural link active." He pulled the cable from the console and jacked it directly into the port behind his ear. The world exploded into white. Cale screamed as the machine tried to eat his mind. It looked for fear. It tried to claw at his traumas, his nightmares. "Not today," Cale gritted out. He pushed back. He used the implant, the artificial calm, the stubborn refusal to bend. He broadcasted defiance. He broadcasted the feeling of standing in the rain, waiting for a vampire and refusing to flinch. "Lysaria," he gasped. "I need you. Balance the signal." Lysaria leaped onto the platform, landing beside him. She placed her hands on his shoulders. She didn't need a cable. Her blood was the connection. She poured herself into him. The machine expected fear. It expected hate. Instead, Lysaria gave it the moment in the shuttle, the taste of his blood that she had refused, the feeling of his hand on her heart, the fierce, terrifying, protective love that she had been trying to hide. She poured longing into the machine. She poured the raw, vulnerable truth that strength was not about being a monster, but about choosing who you protected. The crystal turned a blinding, brilliant gold. "Overload!" a technician screamed, fleeing the room. The shockwave hit. It didn't shatter the building. It passed through the walls, through the rock, up through the spire. In the summit hall above, the president stopped mid-sentence. The Noctri High counselors froze. The soldiers in the plaza dropped their weapons. It wasn't a wave of terror. It was a wave of piercing, absolute clarity. For 10 seconds, every person in the radius of the spire stopped lying to themselves. The fear that had been manipulated, the paranoia that had been stoked by the propaganda, it all dissolved. They saw the strings. They saw the absurdity of the hate. They saw their own desires, stripped of the armor of fear. In the core chamber, the machine burned out. The crystal cracked with a loud ping, turning dark and inert. Kyle ripped the cable from his head and collapsed, gasping for air. Lysaria fell beside him, catching him before he hit the floor. The room was silent. The Cabal leaders stood on the platform, looking dazed. The clarity had hit them too. They looked at each other, seeing not allies, but co-conspirators in a failed atrocity. "It is over," Cale wheezed. The doors to the chamber hissed open. But it wasn't more hybrids. It was the president's personal guard, flanked by Noctri Justicars. They had weapons raised, but they looked confused, shaken by the psychic wave. "Don't shoot!" Cale shouted, holding up a hand. "Look at the console! Look at the logs!" Silas had done his part. On every screen in the room, and on every screen in the city above, the live feed from the chamber was playing. The world had seen the torture. The world had heard Var's confession. The world had felt the weapon try to break them, and felt the golden wave that stopped it. General Holloway dropped his gun. He looked at the president, who had entered the room, face pale with fury. "You are under arrest, General," the president said, his voice trembling but firm. "All of you." Lysaria stood up, pulling Cale with her. She looked exhausted, her hair matted with sweat and blood, her clothes torn. But she stood tall. A Noctri Justikar stepped forward, his weapon leveled at her. He hesitated. He looked at the broken harness. He looked at the humans she had spared. "Lady Vex," the Justikar said slowly, "you are alive." "I am," Lysaria said. She put her arm around Cale, supporting his weight as much as he supported hers. "And we are leaving." The Justikar looked at the president. The president looked at the cameras that were broadcasting to billions. "Let them pass," the president ordered. The sea of soldiers parted. Kyle and Lysaria walked through the center of the room. They didn't look back at the ruined machine or the arrested conspirators. They walked out of the darkness of the core, toward the service elevator that would take them to the surface. "You know," Kyle whispered, wincing as his broken ribs shifted. "I think that went well." "We are alive," Lysaria said, a small, tired smile touching her lips. "And I believe you owe me a honeymoon." "Deal," Kyle said, as the elevator doors closed, shielding them from the chaos of the world they had just saved. Cale leaned his head against her shoulder. "Why weren't you afraid?" he asked softly, echoing the question she had asked him so long ago. Lysaria kissed the top of his head. "Because you were watching." The car ascended, carrying the monster and the strategist up toward the light. The dismantling of the ultraweapon was not a silent affair. It screamed as it died. For 3 weeks, the core of the Unity Spire had been a hive of industrial activity. Joint teams of human engineers and Noctri matter shapers worked in 12-hour shifts, slicing through the crystalline matrix that had nearly enslaved the minds of 2 civilizations. The sound of plasma cutters and resonance dampeners echoed through the hollowed-out bedrock, a constant, grinding reminder of how close they had come to the precipice. Cale Arden stood on the observation gantry, watching a massive chunk of the psychic crystal being lowered into a containment field. His ribs were still taped, and he leaned slightly on the railing to favor his left side. But he was standing. "It looks smaller when it is in pieces," Lysaria Vex said, appearing beside him. She moved differently now. The frantic, cornered animal energy of the infiltration was gone, replaced by a cold, simmering stillness. She wore a simple tunic of black synth silk over utilitarian trousers, though the ceremonial blade, the one that had tasted the blood of the hybrid assassin, still hung at her hip. "Most monsters do," Kyle replied, not looking away from the work crews. "Once you turn the lights on and take them apart, they are just wires and bad intentions." "The emergency council is convening in the upper atrium," Lysaria said, her scarlet eyes tracking the movement of a Noctri worker lifting a girder that would have crushed a human. "They are debating what to do with us." "I know," Kyle said. "My invite must have gotten lost in the mail." "They are afraid," she murmured. "Not of the weapon. Of us." 10 minutes later, they stood before the council. It was a makeshift assembly, gathered in one of the few conference rooms in the spire that hadn't been scorched by the psychic shockwave. The table was crowded with interim leaders, the vice president of the Earth Alliance, a Noctri matriarch who had denounced Var, and a handful of military commanders who looked like they hadn't slept in a month. "Mr. Arden, Lady Vex," the vice president began, shuffling a stack of digital slates. He was a man named Corwin, whose primary qualification for leadership was that he hadn't been in the room when the mind control wave hit. "We have been discussing your situation." "Our situation," Lysaria repeated, her voice cool. "You mean the fact that we saved your city while you were cowering in a bunker?" "We mean the fact that you are a political liability," the Noctri matriarch cut in. Her voice was like dry leaves skittering on stone. "You are symbols of a conflict we are trying to bury. The public sees you and they remember the terror. They remember the blood." "We have prepared a package," Corwin said quickly, sliding a datapad across the table. "Full pension, a private estate on the archipelago of Sector 8, or if you prefer, a villa in the cloud gardens of the Noctri homeworld. Quiet, secure, far away from the cameras." Kyle picked up the pad. He scrolled through the list of amenities: private security, lifetime stipend, a literal golden parachute. He tossed the pad back onto the table. It made a sharp clatter. "No," Kyle said. Corwin blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "We are not retiring," Kyle said, crossing his arms. "And we are definitely not going into exile so you can rewrite history comfortably." "You are dangerous," a human general snapped. "She is a walking weapon of mass destruction. And you are a rogue operative who hacked a planetary defense grid. You cannot just walk around the city. Who better to watch the shadows than the people who know what lives in them?" Lysaria stepped forward. She placed her hands on the table, leaning in until she was eye level with the matriarch. "The Cabal is gone, but the rot remains. There are other labs, other weapons buried in the dark. You know this." "We want to lead the Oversight Council," Kale stated calmly. "A joint task force, human and Noctri. Our job will be to hunt down the remnants of the Crimson Wake and dismantle every piece of hybrid weaponry in the system." "That is impossible," Corwin sputtered. "The optics." "The optics," Lysaria interrupted, "are that we are the only two people this city trusts, because we are the only ones who didn't lie to them." She straightened up, her presence filling the room. "We will not be hidden away like shameful secrets. We will stand in the light, and we will remind you, every single day, of the price of your silence." The room went quiet. Kyle watched the faces of the council members. He saw annoyance, fear, and finally reluctant resignation. They needed Kale and Lysaria, whether they liked it or not. "We start tomorrow," Kale said. "And I want an office with a working coffee machine. A real one." The months that followed were a blur of reconstruction and investigation. The city was healing, but the scars were visible. The Unity Spire was repurposed as the headquarters for the new Oversight Council, a bustling hub where human analysts and Noctri warriors worked side by side, often with a mixture of suspicion and grudging respect. Kyle and Lysaria became a fixture of the nightly news. They were a jarring sight, the tall, ethereal predator and the tired-looking human strategist, walking through the ruins of old black sites or standing on podiums answering hostile questions from the press. Their dynamic became the subject of endless public fascination. They didn't play the role of the love-struck couple the propaganda office wanted, nor the tragic monsters the critics feared. They were professional, sharp-tongued, and relentlessly competent. During a raid on a hidden warehouse in the industrial sector, a clip went viral. A nervous human bureaucrat had tried to stop Lysaria from entering a restricted zone, citing protocol. "Protocol," Lysaria had snarled, looming over him, "is what kept the weapon running for 50 years. Move, or I will fold you into a shape that fits in my pocket." The bureaucrat had fainted. Kyle, standing in the background, had just sighed, sipped his coffee, and stepped over the man's body. "Technically," Kale had said to the camera drone, She is joking, but I wouldn't test it. Behind the public performance, and however, something quieter was building. They had moved back into the Zenith Spire. It had been swept, stripped of every bug and surveillance device, and rebuilt. The Noctri biocircuitry in the walls had been toned down, the lighting adjusted to a warmer spectrum. It no longer felt like a cage or a fortress. It felt, tentatively, like a home. One evening, 6 months after the summit, a storm lashed the city. Thunder rattled the panoramic windows, but inside, the air was still. Lysaria stood by the fireplace, which was burning real wood, a rare luxury. She had removed the heavy outer plating of her armor, wearing only a thin silk layer. She looked softer in the firelight, the sharp angles of her face smoothed by the shadows. Kale sat on the rug, surrounded by physical files, paper dossiers that couldn't be hacked. He watched her. "You are staring," she said, not turning around. "I am appreciating," Kale corrected. "You look peaceful. It is a good look on you." "Peace is boring," she said, but there was no bite in it. She turned to face him. "I miss the noise sometimes, the clarity of combat." "Adrenaline is a hell of a drug," Kyle agreed. He stood up, abandoning the files. He walked over to her, stopping just outside her personal space. "But we are not at war tonight, Lysaria," he said softly. "The doors are locked. The world is outside." She looked up at him. The scarlet of her eyes was deep, swirling with a complexity that he had learned to read. There was desire there, yes, but also a lingering ancient hesitation. "We have been running for a long time," she whispered, "even when we are standing still." "I am done running," Kyle said. He reached out and took her hand. His fingers traced the lines of her palm, the scar where they had made their blood pact months ago. "I want you," Kyle said. The words were simple, heavy. "Not the partner, not the symbol. You." Lysaria's breath hitched. She stepped closer, closing the gap. She brought her other hand up to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "You know what I am," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You know what I crave." "I know," Kale said. "If I lose control." "You won't." "How can you be sure?" she demanded, her eyes searching his. "I am a predator, Kale. It is woven into my DNA." "Because I trust you," Kale said, "more than I trust myself." He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't the desperate, frantic kiss of the casino hotel or the blood-stained shuttle. It was slow, deliberate. It was a question asked and answered in the press of lips and the tangle of breath. Lysaria made a low sound in her throat and pulled him closer, her strength evident even in her gentleness. They moved together, not toward the bedroom, but simply sinking down onto the rug before the fire. The world narrowed down to the sensation of skin on skin, the contrast of her cool, smooth flesh against his warmth. Clothes were discarded, not with haste, but with reverence. Kyle looked at her, the pale expanse of her skin, the faint bioluminescent veins that traced her ribs, the scars of 100 battles. She was terrifyingly beautiful, and she looked at him. The fragile human frame, the map of old injuries, the neural port behind his ear. When they finally joined, it was an act of reclamation. They were taking back the bodies that had been used as tools by empires. But the hunger was there. Kale could feel it in the way her muscles tensed, the way her breathing shifted to a sharp, shallow rhythm. He could smell the change in her pheromones, sharp, metallic, intoxicating. He pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes. The pupils were blown wide, the red glowing with an internal light. Her fangs were extended, resting against her lower lip. "Do it," Kyle whispered. Lysaria froze. Kale, I want you to, he said. He tilted his head back, exposing the line of his throat. Take what you need. I am right here. I am not going anywhere. It was the ultimate surrender. It was the moment he placed his life in her hands. Not out of necessity, but out of love. Lysaria trembled. She lowered her head slowly, her breath cool against his neck. She waited, giving him one last second to pull away. He didn't. He ran his hand through her white hair, anchoring her. She bit him. It was sharp, a sudden sting that vanished instantly, replaced by a rush of endorphins, a natural anesthetic in her saliva. Kyle gasped, his back arching. For Lysaria, it was an explosion of sensory input. The taste of him was rich, vibrant, echoing with the psychic resonance of his calmness. The beast inside her roared in triumph, demanding she drink, demanding she drain him, demanding she take everything. More, the beast screamed. Enough, the woman answered. She took a small, measured amount. She drank the essence of his trust, the physical manifestation of their bond. It was overwhelming, intimate beyond any physical touch. And then, she stopped. It took every ounce of will she possessed. Her body screamed in protest, but she pulled back. She licked the wound, sealing it instantly with her enzyme, just as she had in the shuttle. She rested her forehead against his chest, gasping for air, shaking violently. I stopped, she whispered, her voice full of wonder. I stopped. Kyle held her tight, stroking her back. I knew you would. It was, she struggled for words, it was the hardest thing I have ever done. And the bravest, Kyle said. They lay there for a long time as the fire burned down to embers. The silence was heavy, but it was not empty. It was filled with a profound relief. The monster had been faced, invited in, and controlled. I learned something today, Lysaria murmured, tracing the line of his jaw. A fear kept me safe for a long time. It kept me sharp. But it was a cage. I thought my hunger was a chain. But it is just a part of me. It only controls me if I fear it. Desire is the same, Kale said, kissing her forehead. It can burn you down, or it can keep you warm. The difference is who is holding the match. You are a philosopher now, husband, she teased gently. Just a man who is happy to be alive, Kyle smiled, and happy to be yours. The changes began the next morning. Lysaria appeared at breakfast wearing a white shirt and trousers, human fashion, soft fabrics. She had left the heavy pauldrons and greaves of her armor on the stand. She still wore the vambraces on her forearms. She was not foolish, but she looked less like a weapon of war and more like a woman who was ready to live in peace. You look different, Kyle said over his coffee. I feel lighter, she admitted. I do not need to carry the weight of a dreadnought just to eat toast. I have an appointment today, Kyle said, setting his cup down. At the medical center. A checkup? Lysaria asked, instantly alert. A recalibration, Kyle said. I am having the implant adjusted. The suppression algorithms, Lysaria frowned. To make them stronger? To turn them down, Kyle said. I want to feel it again. Lysaria, the fear. Why? She asked, baffled. You have a gift. You are immune to the paralysis that plagues your kind. I am numb, Kyle corrected. I realized it last night. When I am with you, I want to feel everything, the good and the bad. I want to feel my heart race when you walk into a room. I want to feel the worry when you are late. Fear is part of being human. If I cut it out, I am cutting out a part of myself. He reached across the table and took her hand. I don't want to be the fearless tactician anymore. I just want to be Kale, scared, messy, human Kale. Lysaria looked at him with a softness that would have terrified her a year ago. "Then I will protect you," she promised. "When the fear comes." "I know," Kale said. 2 weeks later, the day of the joint address arrived. The plaza beneath the Unity Spire was packed with 100,000 people, humans and Noctri standing shoulder to shoulder. The air was filled with the hum of drones and the murmur of a populace that was slowly learning to trust the sky again. Kyle and Lysaria stood on the balcony. They did not stand behind a podium. They stood together, side by side, holding hands. The image was broadcast to every colony in the system, the vampire and the human, the monster and the strategist. "Citizens of Earth and the Dominion," Kyle began, his voice amplified across the square. He felt a flutter in his chest, a spike of adrenaline, a quiver of nerves. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. "We stand here today not as heroes," Kyle said, "but as survivors. We survived the war, we survived the peace, and we survived ourselves." Lysaria stepped forward. Her voice was clear, ringing like a bell. "For generations, we were taught that safety lay in fear. We built walls. We built weapons. We told ourselves that if we were terrifying enough, we would never be hurt." She looked out at the sea of faces. "We were wrong. Fear is a shield, yes. But if you wear it too long, it becomes a suffocating weight. It blinds you, it makes you easy to manipulate. We almost lost everything because we were afraid to trust." Kyle continued, "We let leaders use our fear as a leash. We are asking you today to cut that leash." "It is not easy," Lysaria said. "To look at your enemy and see a neighbor, to look at a monster and see a partner. It requires a courage that is harder than pulling a trigger." She squeezed Kale's hand, lifting it for the crowd to see. "But it is the only way we survive," she said. "Do not worship your fear. Master it. Use it. But do not let it rule you." The silence held for a heartbeat, and then the applause started. It wasn't the polite applause of the gala. It was a roar. It was the sound of two worlds exhaling at once. Later that night, the city was quiet. The reception was over. The dignitaries had gone home, and the lights of the megacity stretched out to the horizon like a carpet of diamonds. Kyle and Lysaria stood on the private balcony of the Zenith Spire. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of rain and ozone. Lysaria leaned against the railing, looking up at the stars. The smog had cleared enough to see the constellations, the old human ones and the new ones charted by Noctri navigators. "They cheered," she said softly. "But I still saw it in their eyes. Some of them. They look at my teeth and they wonder." "Let them wonder," Kale said, standing beside her. "Wonder is the first step to understanding." She turned to him. The wind caught her white hair, blowing it across her face. Her eyes were soft, reflecting the city lights. "Sometimes I still hear the whispers," she confessed. "In my own head, monster, weapon, curse. They are just echoes," Kale said. "Old ghosts." She studied his face. He looked older than when they met, the lines around his eyes deeper. But he looked alive. He looked present. "Everyone is afraid of me," she said quietly, repeating the words she had spoken in the debriefing room so long ago. "But why aren't you?" Kale smiled. He reached up and cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Because I have seen you," he answered. "I have seen you covered in blood, saving a man who didn't deserve it. I have seen you holding back an army to protect a diplomat. I have seen you crying in the dark because you didn't want to be a weapon." He leaned closer. "The world sees the teeth. Lysaria. I see the woman who refused to bite. And honestly, The thought of a life without you scares me a hell of a lot more than you ever could. You feel fear now, she whispered. Does it change how you see me? Yes, Kyle said. It makes me realize exactly how brave I have to be to love you, and I am okay with that. Fear will always exist, she said. It will, Kyle agreed. But we don't let it choose for us. Lysaria smiled, a true smile, one that reached her scarlet eyes and made them shine like stars. No, she said, we choose. She pulled him in. They kissed as the night deepened around them, a lingering, fierce connection between two souls who had walked through the fire and come out the other side. Below them, the city lights brightened, and in the distance, a ship streaked across the sky, heading toward the stars. The war was over. The work had just begun. But as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms against the infinite dark, they knew they were ready for whatever came next. The fear was gone. Only the future remained.